All right. So my plan here is to again go through this thing really quick, point out a few things, and then do some programs or look at some programs in class, and get used to writing methods. Again, this is still something that you probably had seen in your prior class, so most of it should be a review, not something completely new. However, if you still have any questions, feel free to ask, or let me or stop me and have me go over it one more time if you need some more explanation. Another thing I just wanted to point out, I was just looking at my surveys from the prior weeks, and I have very few people responding to it. Again, that's an anonymous survey. I do not see who has done it or who had completed it, but I think week number 3 had about 6 people, week number 2 had 2 people, or vice versa. So, and one of the things that I saw, I had a question saying, are the content or the things that we are covering in class or in lecture, or the things that I'm opening on the shell, is that helping you in completing your work? And I think there was, and again, the numbers were so small. I think if it was 6 people who have taken this survey, 1 person said no. But then I had a follow-up saying, please let me know any of the feedback as to what I can do, or how is it that you think we can change or tweak things so that we can have a better understanding the teaching learning process, whatever you would like me to do, if it is doing more programs, or I thought we did some open labs, we have some tutoring resources. If you want me to go over the programs a little more, whatever you want me to do, we'll try to do. Again, just remember that we have to address the class as a whole, so I can't just do one thing. I try to mix and match and do different things. And again, everybody has a different way of learning and understanding the material. So if I'm not addressing one thing which you might think might help, just let me know. So that's why I'm asking you all to take that survey and let me know what is helping, what should I do more, because I do want you to succeed in the class. And it does not really help if I just continue doing this, and then some people are doing their work, getting their work done, and a lot of people are left behind, and not doing their work. Because really what's going to happen is, in the next 3-4 weeks, you'll see people have already completed about 5, 6, 7 assignments. And if you're looking at 2 programs per assignment, you guys have already done about 8 or 10 programs by that time. And some people are going to do more because they're practicing while they're reading the book or reading the material. So it's really about you trying to write programs and looking at the errors, figuring out the errors, understanding the concepts and things like that. So please let me know, or you can write me an email, personal email, or you can talk about that in class. There's nothing wrong with speaking up about what can be done a little differently. All right, so this chapter talks about methods. Now, we use the term methods and functions pretty liberally, and both of them means the same thing. We talk about functions, and we already addressed to functions last time, where we referred to some of those functions in the string chapter, and those were all library functions. So the program that you wrote, had to do with how you can take a string and extract part of that string and utilize it for your program. And you are doing it by calling in some methods, but they were all library methods, right? So you just went through the string library and saw the different kinds of methods that you have, and you utilize those methods to extract the strings. Now, this chapter talks about methods or functions, but now we will get into writing those functions by ourselves or by the users. So you do not always have to depend on the library functions. You can write your own functions as well. And the reason you write functions is pretty much the same as why you have used them before. It's because that you do not want the same code to be written over and over and over again. So what you do is write your own functions with a particular name and a signature, and then whenever you need to use it, you just call that method or that function, and the function would do the job for you. So this chapter talks about what are the different kinds of methods that you can write, and it shows you some examples of those methods. So that's what we are going to be doing. So here is something. It shows you that it's doing some kind of a for loop or some kind of a looping, but this is all they have done, and I can come in and define a method where I don't have to write this looping function over and over again. I could put it in a function, and then I would just call that functions and pass some values, and it would do the job for me. So here are my objectives. We'll talk about methods, and we'll talk about the formal parameters, actual parameters, and again, those are kind of technical terms, and it's very important that you understand how to really handle methods. So not only about writing, but when you and in Java, that's very, very important, because the entire signature or the method, the way you would write things would pretty much tell the outside people what the method is going to be returning, what kind of value it is expecting to be put in when somebody is calling that method. And it is very important in here, because when we start getting into objects and define classes, then we need to know what those actual methods are and how we can call them so that it would do the job for us. Okay, if I don't know those things, then the method is not going to be called properly, and it is not going to do the job that it's intended to do. So important that you all understand how to manage your methods, writing, passing the right values, calling those methods, things like that. All right, so here is an example. Those of you guys who have done other languages, is this anything new? Probably not, other than this syntax. So let's take a look at my method. So look at the definition there. A method is a collection of statements that are grouped together to perform an operation. So I can define method as almost like a magical box which would do something for me. How it does, if I write it, I know, but an outsider doesn't need to know. Okay, if I say I have written a method which calculates your age, okay, then I know what I have done, but you as a user doesn't need to know. The only thing you need to know is, okay, if I want to use your method, what are some of the things that I need? And I say, well, I would need for you to put in your birth year, and I can calculate it. Okay, so what is inside, you don't need to know as an end user. You just need to know, okay, tell me the name of the method and I'll give you my birth year. That's all I need to know. So that's basically what it's doing over here. And in this case, we are defining a method. So let's look at the signature of this method. Public means it's a public method. Static, we'll get to it. Remember, we talked about a little earlier that there are static versus non-static methods. So let's say static is just a keyword at this point. Int means integer. Okay, and then max is the name of the method. All right, this is a name that is not a keyword. You can come up with any kind of name. You can call it Eugene, you can call it Jim, whatever. But you want to call something or name the method something which would actually mean something to the end user. So I'm calling it max, and then you have a open and close parenthesis. Remember, that's your signature of that method. Every time you call a method or a function, it would have the open and close parenthesis. In this case, you do have parameters. How many? 2. Num1 and num2 separated by a comma. And the parameters that you have to also tell them what kind of parameters are they. Right? Integer and integer. Now you have a curly bracket open over here and a curly bracket closed over here. What does that do? That defines the body of this method. Remember last time we had a question in the class saying I'm very confused about those curly brackets, where to begin, where to end. Pretty much everything that we do in Java is going to have an open curly and a closed curly. So when you open a class, open curly, close curly. You have a method, open curly, close curly. You write a separate method, open. If you write a conditional statement, curly bracket, the body. You write a loop, it has a curly bracket. So my signature here is, if I just give you this line, you should be able to tell me several things. One is, does the method return a value? The answer is yes, because it says int right before max. Okay? If it would not return any value, then this would say void, public static void. Okay? So either int or a double, okay? Anything that you see, the data type determines the value it is going to return. Now, as soon as you see a value that is going to be returning, one thing you can always check is, inside the body you should always have a return statement, right? Because if I'm saying that this is a value that is returning, you have to have a return statement, otherwise how would you return? Okay, so if you have a value that you're returning, you should always have a return statement at the very end of the method, right? You can also know the name of the method. What's the name of the method here? Max. Okay. You also know how many arguments it would take. In this case, 2. And you also know that those arguments has to be integer values. So if I call this method called max, I am expecting, the compiler is expecting 2 values from you. And if you put in 7.5 and 8, what do you think it's going to do? It's going to complain. It says, wait a minute, this max can only take integer values. So 7.5 is going to throw it off. Okay, so if you say 5 and 9, yes, I'm okay, because you fed me something which is allowed in my signature. You guys with me? All right. This is the whole process called defining a method. So I defined or created my method. When I call this method, max, my technical term is invoking or calling a method. So I say, okay, I want to call this method called max, and I'm going to pass in these 2 values, x and y. The question that I always get, let me just finish, that I always get is, does it have to be x or does it have to be num1 or num2? It can be anything you want. Okay? This is only telling you that these are my actual values that I'm passing. And I can define that value. In this case, I'm not passing the actual value 3 and 4. I'm basically passing a variable which stores the value 3 and maybe 4. So this could be num1 and num2, x1 and x2, whatever be the case. Now, if you do have a num1 and num2, then you have not a conflict, but you have the same variable that you have defined. So if you are very, very comfortable, now again, there is nothing wrong if you say, I want to define my variable as num1 over here. Okay, because the variables has its own scope. So if you define something within this, then this value is not going to be seen as over here. So if you are absolutely clear, very confident about methods, then it's okay to define it as the same variable. But if you're not, if you're just learning, try to come up with two different variable values over here. So if you define a num1, don't use a num1. But again, there's nothing wrong with the num1. It's just that sometimes people get confused with, okay, which num1 am I referring to? They are very different. Even though they are called num1, they're different. Okay, so if you're not real comfortable, use a different name. There are tons of other variables you could use. Okay, yes, you had a question. Okay, question is, does it always have to be 2 parameters? The answer is no. In this case, it has to be 2. In this case, right? So I defined the method and I only passed, or I created a method with a signature which allows for 2 parameters. Now if I had said int num1, int num2, double num3, then this is not correct because it is expecting another value. Okay, so it's all about how I'm defining my method. Okay, if I define my method with 2, then I can call it 2. All right. All right. It's getting into a little more details, explaining everything that I just talked about a little earlier. Look at the technical terms: parameter list, method name, formal parameters, actual parameters, arguments. And the thing is, all these terms are again used very, very loosely. Okay, so sometimes you'll see the book talk about, oh, pass a parameter or pass an argument. But I mean, when you define, that's when you should be calling it a parameter list. When you call it, you should be calling it arguments. But you see that sometimes they also say actual parameters. But everything pretty much means the same thing. All right, do I have any questions in here? Pretty simple, but I really want you to have a good grasp on this because we're going to be using it a whole lot. Everybody good? All right. Talked about method signature, method name, formal parameters, actual parameters, argument, return value type. Okay. So here is an example right here. I start a program, public static void main string argument. Then I have some of these variables. Okay, I and j, I put the value of 5 and 2, and then I define another variable called k, and then call the method called max. Okay, max I comma j. So what are my actual values for I and j? 5 and 2, right? System out print line, the maximum between I and j is k. Okay. So as soon as the compiler reaches this line and looks for this max, it is now looking for where is the method that defines what to do with this. Because it doesn't know what to do because you're just writing it. It will go back over here and say, okay, here is my method called public static int max, int num1 and num2. So what is it going to do? It's going to use the value 5 here. It's going to use the value of j, which is 2 here. Okay, so it's going to put 5 and j. Now inside this method, I define a variable called result. Okay, and I say if num1, what is num1? 5. Num2 is 2. I say if num1 is greater than num2, then result is num1. But if it is not, if this is not a true statement, it's going to come to the result, come to the else statement and say, okay, then my num2 is going to be stored in my variable called result. right? And my last statement from that method is return result. So when I call this method called max, if I pass in 5 and 2, what am I going to get stored in K? 5. What if I put in 48 and 64 or 48 and 32? Right. So if I do 25 and 64, it's really the num2 that gets stored in that result, because you're going to check this condition. This one would fail. It said, okay, and now I'm going to take the value of num2 and store it. So now this is going to be your value. All right, animation, going through this thing, no problem. Okay, let's look at some examples of this method. Okay, so let's go through the code. Public class test void method. What is this? This is the name of my class. Can name it anything. Okay, open my curly bracket, and this curly bracket has an end, which is the very last one over here, right? Now I have another statement, which is my main method, and it's public static void main string. Again, starts with a curly bracket, and this curly bracket is ending right here. And when you are using those editors, Eclipse or NetBeans, as soon as you click over here, it will highlight the closing at the bottom. So as soon as you click on over here, you'll see there's a highlight over here which identifies that that is the opening of that and this is the closing of this. Same thing like that. If you open the first one, it will do a little highlight over here and it will tell you that's the closing. All right. System out print, the grade is print grade 78.5. So here we know this is a method, right? Because it has an open and close parenthesis right afterward. Now you are passing a value here. What kind of value? Double. I have another system out print line, and I said the grade is, and I again call my method again, print grade 59.5. So what am I doing here? I'm writing a class where I'm using my method twice. Okay. Now, as soon as I come or hit that method print grade, so the first time I see print grade, I said, oh, okay, where is my print grade? So I come over here. All right, so now let's read the method. Public static void. Okay. So it says void, which means it does not return anything. Print grade is the name of my method. Look at my argument list or my formal parameter. Double, and again a variable name called score, right? So when I call my method print grade, it is expecting a double value, and I put in a double value at the very beginning. So it is now going to pass this 78.5 from here or through here. It's almost like a funnel. So score is going to take that value 78.5, and then it's going to come in and match these conditions. If the score is greater than equals 90, system out print line A. So does it matching value 78.5? No. Else if 80.0, it's B. It doesn't match this condition either. Else score is greater than equals 70.0. Oh yeah, that is true. So now I'm just going to say system out print line C. So if that condition matches 78.5, this is the print line that I'm going to get. So I'm going to get statement saying B. Now when I call my second time method, I say system out print the grade is, and I pass in now the value 59.5, and I'm going to go through all this, and I don't catch anything. Not 90.0, 80.0, 70.0, 60.0. But I catch this. So, okay, if none of the condition matches, then I'm just going to say an F. So 59.5 is an F. Yes. Okay. So your question is, this one over here, should it be after or could it be before? It could be either place. As long as it is within your class. Okay? Because the compiler, when they look for print grade, they're going to look either over here or they're going to look up. As long as it is within the class, it will go find it. Okay? So now, if this is outside, it won't find it. It will find it if you define it as a class and define it as an object. But we'll come to that later. But right now, keeping it simple, when I write my method, you will see some book actually writes it at the top. Okay? It doesn't matter as long as it is within. Okay? Generally, you would see people follow the same pattern. If you're writing it at the back, at the bottom, that's where everybody writes it, method. And remember, this is only one method that you're using. You might have a program where you might have to use 2 or 3 different methods. So then you write your method, 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 and then in your main program, that is where you call it, which is this part, according to the technical term, is invoking or calling the method. All right? All right. He just asked the question. What was my answer? Bottom. Okay. You're good with bottom. I'm good with bottom. But it could be really either place, as long as it can find it within my class. All right? Yeah. All right. So here is my another program, and it's written a little differently. Okay. So I say public class test return grade method, name of my class. Okay. Public static void main, and I have within my method I only have 2 statements. System out print the grade is, okay, plus, and I'm calling that method called get grade, which is coming from here. Okay, again, get grade, see what it's returning, char. So the one thing, as soon as I see a char, I should see is a return statement here. Okay, so if score greater than equals 90, return A, else if 80, return B. So it is looking for this return statement when I have a char or something that I'm returning. So if you have a value that is returning, you have to have those return statement, otherwise it's not going to return. What's the difference between this one and the other one? Where does it get it from? Right here. You pass in the raw value there. What's the difference between that other program and this program? They pass it. This is system out print line. Now in the previous one, remember, all my system out was here. But in this one, I only have a system out at the very top. You guys see this? Same thing, but written very differently. Both of it works. No problem. It's your style that fits. So if you say, well, I actually want to have something returned like a character, and I'm going to have some return over here, but look at my main method. Now you could have said, okay, enter your score and then written a system out print line with a grade and pass that score in. Either way. Everybody good? Real simple, but make sure you're very comfortable with all the different ways it's written. If you're getting confused here, please stop me, because you're going to be seeing this utilized a lot when we get into objects, other methods, and other concepts. Everybody good, right? Okay, yes. Here's your input. You're inputting it directly over here. You're calling this method called getGrade, and this is the value that you're inputting. That's my raw value that I'm inputting. That's what I was saying earlier, that you can write your programs either way. You can ask for an input, or you can do it directly from there. All right. Let's take a look at this method. Passing parameters, public static void main n print line. What is the name of my method? Okay. Is it going to be something that's going to return a value? Okay, void. Is it going to be accepting parameters? How many? In this case, what kind? What kind of value is it going to accept? Okay. And then inside my body, I have a for loop. Okay. System out print line message. So what do you think this line is going to do? Suppose you invoke the method using welcome to Java, comma 5. What do you think it's going to do? Next to each other, or to the next, in the next line? So welcome to Java, welcome to Java, welcome to Java. Okay. What about the second one? Okay. So you get the idea. What about this? Oh, very good. Why? Very good. Very good. All right, let's take a look at this example. Your class is called increment, public static void main, starting with x equals 1, system out print line. Your string is before the call x is plus x, and then increment x. So that's my method, right? So increment is my method. The value that I pass is x. What's my increment method? I write public static void increment int n. So it is expecting an integer value. I go inside and I do n plus plus. So if I input 3, it's going to be n plus plus, so adding 1 to it. System out print line n inside the method is n. What's the output going to be? Okay. And before the call x is How many people are comfortable with pass by value and pass by, what's the other kind? I thought I would show some. Oh, actually I like it. It does not compare it yet. All right. The program demonstrates passing values to the methods. Okay. Well, let me see. Well, let's write just some few simple examples. But before I write that, let me just talk a little bit about this ambiguous invocations. So I have a public class. What is the name of my method? This entire thing, ambiguous overloading. Oops. I have a body, and inside my body I have a main method, public static void main string argument. System out print line max 1 2. So max is my method, and I'm passing two values 1, 2. And I have two methods. I have one method which says public static double. So what does the double signify? That it returns a double value. Okay. Max is the name of my method, and I pass int num1 and double num2. Is with me? Int and double. Okay. And it says if num1 is greater than num2, return num1, else return num2. And then you have another method called public static double max double num1 int num2. So what are they doing over here? They're just reversing thing inside. When I pass a parameter like this, which one do you think it's going to call? Both of them are okay, right? Because one could be looked as 1.0, two could be looked at 2.0. So if I call this would satisfy my 1, this could be my 2.0. But I can also satisfy this, where this could be 1.0 and this could be 2. So this would lead to those ambiguous method call, and that is something that they want you to not do or avoid. So sometimes, again, as a programmer, you can really confuse the compiler, because everything is correct over here. You know, it has some rules where it says, now it could not have done it if I would have had doubles, but I mixed it, int and double, double and int. Okay, so do not do things like this. It confuses the compiler. Okay, scope. Okay, let's talk a little bit about scope. Remember earlier I was talking about those arguments and the parameters, and I said you can call it num1 or x1, doesn't matter, and I mentioned a word or a phrase called scope, and this is what it means. When you define a variable within a method which is isolated by open and close parenthesis, then the value of that variable is only visible within that body. Okay, so if I define another variable but actually write it somewhere else, then that variable value and this variable value, even though they are the same name, should not mix. Because if I'm trying to reach out to that body, first part, that variable has its own value. If I want to reach out to the second one, that variable has its own value. They cannot mix. If you define something at the very top, it can be seen anywhere. Okay, so scope basically tells you where a variable can be seen and where it cannot be seen. Sometimes you might write something and call it from outside, and it says, uh-oh, I don't know what the value is because the scope ended when we ended or closed our body. So in this case, when I have int 1 equals 0, int I equals 10, look at the scope of I. So the scope of I is within this curly bracket, and actually this is wrong. The scope of I is between this and j because it is kind of included inside. If you look at this int j, that is only between, and again they did not have, that's why I said it's wrong. They probably should be defining another method called for, and then j would be inside it. You guys with me? Okay, and we'll probably come across some examples. Okay, let me just go over this something real quick, and then we'll start writing some program. I mentioned this thing already before, method abstraction. You can think of a method body as a black box that contains the detailed implementation of the method. Remember I talked about that a little earlier? When I am using method, then as an end user of the method, I do not need to know what goes inside. The only thing I need to know is the name of the method and what kind of value it's going to accept. So as long as I know my method header and the value that I can input, then what is happening over here is not my concern. Okay, I just would get some value back. Now, how I calculated this is again not my concern. It is really dependent upon the programmer that wrote that method. Now, of course, you want to write something that is doing a correct calculation, but this is the part that you write inside the method body. When we deal with object-oriented programs and we deal with a team of people writing things, then everybody doesn't do the same thing. Okay, if it's a big project, they'll sit down at the very beginning and say, okay, I want us to isolate these things so that we can take chunks of things and we can write together. And especially in object-oriented programming, we say, okay, let's define these classes and what are the kind of methods that I would need for these classes. So Eugene said, okay, I'll do this class, and anything I need to do with this class, I'll handle. Somebody said, okay, I'll do this class, anything I need to do, I'll handle. And then only thing we need to do is let people know that, okay, in my class, these are my 4 methods, and this is the kind of value I'm expecting for this. And then I write my method. So anytime I use that method that Eugene had written, as long as I'm calling the right method name and passing the right value, it's going to work. And then somebody else writes another one, somebody else writes another one. So it's very important that you understand the importance of giving the right method name, right argument, and then you'll get the value. Why do we write methods? Well, first you saw is you do not want to rewrite your code over and over again. So by using a method, you write it once, you can use it over and over again. Information hiding, another reason. You do not want outside people to see what you're doing with it. Okay, so if you say, well, if you put this money somewhere or in my bank, I'll give you this much interest. Now I would write a program which would calculate my interest. Okay, so as long as you give me a principal amount, I'll give you what your output is going to be, which is going to be calculated within that body. And then reduce complexity. Your program gets, it looks a lot cleaner when you have things written in methods. Okay, and this is just breaking it down. All right. Let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back and write some simple methods and see how it is working.